Hello, everyone. We have had some critical technological difficulties this week, and as a result, the episode that was meant to be posted today was not ready in time to be uploaded. We had a mild case of computer gremlins, and I ask that you wish us a speedy recovery. Rather than leave you with nothing, I am reposting an episode from way back in 2023, a lifetime ago. We were so young and innocent then. This episode is about a short story that involves werewolves and American indifference called The Refugee by Jane Rice. Does it feel particularly relevant at this moment? Maybe. We'll see. Thanks as always for being here, and we'll be back next week with our regularly scheduled programming.
Someday when I have $1 million, I'm going to pay you to write The Liquidated Gardener.
I love it.
By the way. Books. Books. Books.
Hello, and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast whose method of celebrating holidays is indicative of its character. I am your host, Grace Todd, writer, editor, book gremlin, and with me today is friend of the pod, William Albritton.
Hi, again.
Hey, buddy.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me once again. I'm blessed and delighted to be on your pod.
On the pod.
On the pod, people, pod, people.
Pee-pee poo-poo.
Pee-pee poo-poo pod, people.
I love that is such a shortcut. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you're doing. Anytime someone says pee-pee poo-poo, everyone giggles.
Mm-hmm. It's a transgenerational, cross-generation. Sure. It's just an all-encompassing phrase.
Exactly. And I already lost track of what I was doing and what I was saying. Oh my gosh. All right.
Well, first of all, what's new with the pod? Any pod news? Any Grace news?
Let me think. I think this that we are recording right now is going to wind up being our 15th episode.
Ooh.
So that's exciting.
That is exciting.
We're getting older, you know? We're getting a little rebellious. We're starting to push back. We're coming into our own sexuality.
Mm-hmm. While furiously in denial of the pod's parents' sexuality, of course.
Absolutely, yeah. Very important. We are horrified at the thought of older podcasts making little baby podcasts, but we're also starting to have very complicated thoughts about other podcasts our age.
This would be a great time to tell a wild story about my youth, but I'm going to save it for the After Dark podcast.
Didn't Read It After Dark. We're just going to do vintage erotica.
Yo. What a fantastic idea. I would be delighted to be the native voyage on Didn't Read It After Dark.
All right. If we ever start doing like bonus episodes, we'll just do vintage erotic stories.
Good little bonus sode. I love it. So what are we getting into today?
All right. Well, today I have brought you a short story called The Refugee.
Poignant.
Well, we'll see.
Oh, boy.
This is a short story that was written by a woman named Jane Rice, and it originally came out in 1943 in Unknown, which was one of America's kind of pulpy early science fiction magazines.
What was the reputation of those magazines?
It kind of depended on the magazine. I mean, they were extremely popular. Unknown was one of the ones that had significantly higher literary standards. You know, some of them were really trashy, like pulp. Behind the Bastards just did a two-parter on some of the really bad.
I just finished reading it, listening to it this morning.
Yeah. So these magazines were just short fiction. They were a little more literary, and they were like the jumping off point for a number of people's careers. And unfortunately, this story doesn't really seem to have been a jumping off point for Jane Rice's career because she didn't publish a ton.
So am I correct in understanding The Refugee as the thinking man's answer to Attack of the Nazi Crabs?
I'll let you decide after we get into it.
I'm so excited. I might be jumping way ahead of both of us, but at some point I'm going to need you to do a bunch of research on what else was in these magazines, though entirely irrelevant to this podcast. Now all I'm interested in is magazine history.
You've become a real magazine history connoisseur.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's good.
That's my bit now.
I'm trying to think of some kind of unnecessarily complicated word for like a magazine historian. There probably is one.
Magazinist.
A magazinologist.
Magazinologist. All right. Tell me about the refugee.
All right. And with that, I am going to tell you the story of Jane Rice's The Refugee. And I'm going to start by setting the scene. The trouble with the war, Millie Cushman thought as she stared sulkily through streaming French windows into her rain-drenched garden, was that it was so frightfully boring. There weren't any men anymore. Interesting ones, that is. Or parties. Or little pink cocktails. Or Café Royale, or long-stemmed roses wrapped in crackly green wax paper. There wasn't even a decent hairdresser left. She had been a fool to stay on, but it had seemed so exciting. Everyone listening to the radio broadcasts, the streets blossoming with uniforms, an air of feverish gaiety, heady as Moselle wine, all over the city. The conversations that made one feel so important, so in the thick of things. Would the Maginot Line hold? Would the British come? Would the Low Countries be invaded? Was it true America had issued an ultimatum? Subjects that, now, were outdated as Gatling guns. Millie Cushman is an American in occupied Paris in World War II.
That is a fraught sentence.
Uh-huh. And she is, as you can tell, chiefly put out by the fact that it is wartime and she can't have little pink cocktails.
It's the cosmopolitan's lament.
The little pink cocktails are a big sticking point for Millie.
Oh.
And she has been in occupied Paris, it sounds like, for a bit. And she stuck around, it is implied, because she was being a war tourist. It was also exciting.
Yikes.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
What just a pure curiosity, what nationality does the name from where does the name Millie derive?
You know, I think it's short for Millicent, I believe. I don't actually know where the name Millicent originates from.
Sprechen Sie Deutsch, Millicent?
Are you looking it up?
Maybe. Oh my fucking god, it's an old German name.
Oh. Well, that's fitting, actually.
Woo!
So Millie stuck around, and maybe shouldn't have. And now, as Jane Rice writes, unexpectedly, the city had become a gaunt gray ghost. No, not a ghost, a cat. A gaunt gray cat with its bones showing through as it crouched on silent haunches and stared unwinkingly before it. Like one of those cats that hung around the alley barrels of the better hotels. Or used to hang. Cooked, a cat bore a striking resemblance to a rabbit.
Damn.
So food is short, and also luxuries are short, and Millie is mostly mad about the latter.
We're at comparing cats to rabbits level of, for the love of God, can I have something but hardtack?
Yes, the cats have all been eaten, and Millie, at this point, because she stuck around too long, is struggling to get a visa.
From Stumst, is she expecting to receive a visa from
the Nazis?
The Nazis, yeah, word.
So the reason that she is still stuck in occupied Paris is because she cannot get a visa. And it notes that it was fortunate that she had had the perception to realize, before it was too late, who were the right people to know. It helped. Which means she is, if not an active collaborator with the Nazis, then not, right?
It's,
those are the right people to know in occupied Paris.
I just recently watched Inglourious Bastards again, and all I can think of is the German actress. You saw Inglourious Bastards, right, Shirley?
Yeah, I just haven't seen it in forever.
She's a German actress, but she's working as a spy.
Right.
And so yeah. But she knows all the right people, obviously.
Yes.
So.
You are in occupied Paris to an extent, especially if you were an American trying to get out. You know, maybe you kind of have to know the right people. So Millie is stuck and is fantasizing at length about food. It says, often of late, she found herself dwelling with an aching nostalgia on her father's butcher shop in Pittsburgh. That had been before he'd invented a new deboner, or meat cleaver, or something, and had amassed an unbelievable amount of money before he strangled to death on a loose gold filling at Tim O'Toole's Clam Bake.
Jesus, what a saga.
What a sentence.
What a breakneck pace.
So her father owned a butcher shop and got extraordinarily rich doing something that she hasn't bothered
Deboning.
to retain. But he's dead now, and so is her mother. And so she's an heiress, right? She's an heiress who was living in Paris and stuck around because she thought it would be interesting.
God.
She's making do. She's trying to stay relatively put together. She's trying very hard to maintain a sense of the things that she was used to enjoying before the war.
Hanging out, grabbing a beverage, attending a Nazi rally.
Like you do.
Just high French society shit, you know.
But it notes, as long as she had liqueur-filled chocolates, and she had had enough foresight to lay in quite a supply, she could be assured of her share. They were better than money at the present exchange. You have already turned against Millie.
Millie. Your chocolates, lady.
So Millie is at this point just kind of drifting around thinking about food when the bell rings for dinner.
This is when the rat crawls onto her head and starts controlling her actions and she becomes a famous chef.
The rat is the refugee. Congratulations. This is actually the story Ratatouille was based on.
Let's go.
But the bell rings for dinner and she's fed up. She's exhausted. It says, but what was the use of keeping up appearances when there wasn't anyone to see? And Maria grumbled so about serving dinner in courses. So she has a servant.
God.
She has a live-in maid named Maria who is still serving her meals in courses. But her chief complaint is that the courses are kind of sad because, again, there's no food.
Surely she does something worthy of praise during the story.
And she grumbles to herself that Maria, the servant, is definitely a bourgeois.
As if in answer, it just gets worse.
With a delightful lack of self-awareness. Because if coming from Pittsburgh meat cleaver money does not make you a bourgeois, I don't know what does. Like,
heir to the Pittsburgh meat cleaver fortune.
Right?
Oh, I love really niche heir fortunes. When you meet some, I mean, this hasn't really happened to me personally, but when you hear stories about like a friend of a friend meeting someone who's uber rich and they're like, yeah, my father owned a company that makes the caps on car gas tanks. And you're like, huh? that made them that rich?
That's a friend of a friend met the Coleman cooler heiress. They're out there.
All right. I love it. You know, the Mars family lives in Virginia. We still have yet to ingratiate ourselves to their fortune, but it's coming.
It's coming. We're going to figure it out.
Yeah. They're friends of the pod.
They don't know it yet.
Hey, everybody. Hey, fam.
But they are.
Hey, fam.
Hey, buddy. Sponsor me, please. I'll talk about candy. Look, I'll talk about anything. So Maria, definitely a bourgeois. And then it says, and this is very...
Wait, the maid?
The maid.
Maid.
Millie is...
live-in servant.
Millie is dismissively referring to Maria as definitely a bourgeois because she doesn't understand the importance of serving a meal in courses, William. She doesn't get it.
Am I lost on the meaning of bourgeois?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so Millie's an idiot.
But William, Maria does not understand the importance of serving meals in courses.
Okay, all right.
It says, Millie yawned and stretched her arms above her head. She arose and, going over to the windows, stood looking out. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds and angered the tiny charms that dangled from her war bracelet. An airplane studded with rhinestones, a miniature cannon with gold leaf wheels, a toy soldier whose diamond chip eyes winked red and blue and green in the sun as he twirled helplessly on his silver chain. 10 or 12 of these baubles hung from the bracelet, and it is indicative of Millie's character that she had bought them as a gift to herself to celebrate the last Bastille Day. I'd like to point out that Jane Rice put celebrate in scare quotes.
Oh, the same way Americans celebrate Veterans Day.
I might have to cut that. I don't know.
You might.
So she's looking out into the garden. And the only other important thing to note before we get into like the main action of the story is that it is objectively a lovely garden. It says later that she rented the house because the garden was so lovely. And at the time she was having all of these kind of visions of, you know, beautiful suppers on the flagstone terrace and having people drop in for tea in the garden and all of that. And despite the war, the garden is still looking quite lovely. even though it's raining, and the flower heads were heavy with sodden, brown-edged petals, and their stalks bent wearily, as if cognizant of the fact that their lives were held by a tenuous thread that was soon to be snapped between the chill, biting teeth of an early frost.
You ever seen the way a droplet will sit on a flower petal, and in the reflection of the droplet you can see like the entire petal kind of behind and through it?
Yeah.
I love that.
It's lovely. It's a lovely image.
Nice garden.
And as she's looking out, there's a quick, ever so slightly derogatory aside about the black servant that she and her family had growing up, which gives her an excuse to fantasize about food again, mostly, but also tells you exactly what kind of a family she's from, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And as she's looking into the garden, fantasizing about her black servant and the food that she used to cook, she notices a pair of hands in the garden.
Hands, run.
Coming through the shrubbery.
A pair of hands.
Followed by a pair of shoulders. Specifically, a pair of naked brown shoulders.
Wait a minute. Doesn't a pair of hands belong to one? Wait, no, people have two shoulders.
Did you forget that for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Like people have one shoulder. What do you mean? Oh, amazing. The level I'm operating on today.
Everyone, we are very awake. We are on brand. We are excited.
Weak, happy, optimistic, loving life.
So I always love to read quotes. Part of the reason I have chosen some of the quotes that I have chosen so far is that Bryce's choice of words is so good and so distinctive. The sun sparkling angrily on her war bracelet and the chill biting teeth of an early frost. It's just like, ooh, Bryce, look at you go, girl.
Can you actually read? Is that a direct quote? The thing with the hands?
So I was actually, I'm gonna go back and read that quote properly.
Sounds good.
So Millie is gazing out on her garden. Two brown hands pushed aside the foliage to allow a pair of broad brown shoulders to come through. Millie gave an infinitesimal gasp. A man was in her garden. A man who, judging from the visible portion of his excellent anatomy, had, literally, lost his shirt.
Dead hot guy in the garden.
He's not dead, he's alive.
Oh.
He's climbing through the foliage.
Alive hot guy in the garden.
First hands, then shoulders, then torso.
We've been on kind of spooky short stories for so long that I just assume every short story we read is going to have dead people in it.
It's corpses all the way down.
You describe a pair of hands and shoulders, a pair of hands allowing shoulders into a garden, and it's like, oh, you're just artfully describing a dead body laying in the like under a bush.
No, he is very much alive, and Millie, it seems for the briefest moment, thinks about calling for help, but instead she is distracted by his, quote, extraordinarily well-shaped head.
Hot guy in the garden.
And his glance fixes itself on her.
What's his name? Is he single?
Well, it says Millie's outcry died aborning.
I love this author.
Dead on arrival. To begin with, Millie realizes, it wasn't a man. It was a youth. And to end with, there was something about him, some queer, indefinable quality that was absolutely fascinating. He was, Millie thought, rather like a young panther or a half-awakened leopard. He was, Millie admitted, entranced, beautiful, perfectly beautiful, as an animal is beautiful. And, automatically, she raised her chin so that the almost unnoticeable pouch under it became one with the line of her throat.
Well, don't I sound like a fucking creep now, huh? Welp. Also, I love the immediate instinct of seeing a well-built youth of just hiding your double chin. Good shit, Millie.
Yep. Way to go, Millie. So as we are beginning to gather, Millie is perhaps not as young as she used to be. And there is a very beautiful, naked young man in her garden.
It's giving like Gen X mom wearing like a 9/11 tee. Like, you know, tell me her bracelet, the way it's described, is not exactly akin to like the weird 9/11 propaganda we have now.
It definitely, in the contemporary, it does kind of feel like it would be, and I want to be clear, like Bastille Day is great, but it's made so clear that she doesn't understand Bastille Day. She just was like, I'm going to get a war bracelet because it's wartime. And so I feel like today it would be like a thin blue line charm, a 9/11 never forget charm, and then confusingly like one charm for some kind of a charity that's like objectively fine.
Susan G. Komen.
Yep, there we go.
100%. Also, thank you for adding context to my my asides that could have sounded pretty bad. So I glad you got what I was going for.
So the youth and Millie are staring at each other, and it says, Millie knew only that his hair was pasted flat to his head with the rain, and that his arms shone like sepia satin, and his eyes were tawny and filled with a flickering inward fire that made suet pudding of her knees.
Oh.
He's very pretty. And also...
kid, like, of age?
Later, she says that she thinks he's about 20. And obviously, we don't know how old she is. We have no idea.
All right.
But I think it's very important to note right here that he's being exoticized, right?
Yeah.
Brown hands, brown shoulders, sepia-toned skin, tawny eyes. It doesn't ever overtly say that he's black. He could be, but...
definitely doesn't fit in Nazi-occupied France.
Yeah.
But sepia-toned could be like Mediterranean.
Sure.
Of some persuasion.
It's unclear, but it's very telling, too, that she describes him as leopard-like and says he's beautiful as an animal is beautiful. So,
yeah,
like,
some straight-up racist shit.
We're definitely getting that othering, exoticizing note. And as they're staring at each other, her servant throws a bucket of water into the garden and he vanishes.
Huh? Just, huh? Like, much the same way a wild animal would in your backyard?
Pretty much. Millie, unable to stop herself, runs out into the garden, but it's too late, and the only thing left is a single footprint in the mud. When she goes back inside, Maria is understandably somewhat confused by the fact that Millie has been running around in the mud when she's supposed to be having her 3-course dinner that she insists on. And she explains that she thought she saw someone looking in the windows. And in another one of those kind of little contextual details we get, Maria's response is, "The police probably," Maria said dourly. "The police have no notions of privacy."
True.
Always true. But also keep in mind which police we're talking about.
You may be shocked to find out that ACAB includes I ruined it. The fucking SS.
And they get into an argument wherein Maria is basically like, "No one wants to look into your windows, Millie."
Nobody wants to look into Millie's windows. No one's concerned with it. No one's concerned with her life.
Yeah.
Or the rat on top of Maria's head that controls the courses that she creates.
That's the side story that's happening right now.
The youth is actually the health inspector. He's resorting to insane ends to shut down Maria's livelihood.
So Maria says that the only person she saw outside was old Philippe, who is apparently walking through the rain with a cough, which is a terrible idea because he's old and has a cough. You shouldn't be walking through the rain. It says, "Anyway, Philippe is too old. When one is as old as Philippe, one is no longer interested. Anyhow, his son was killed at Avignon. Philippe would not look in the windows," which means you kind of have to read between the lines. But what that is basically saying is Philippe probably is not spying on his neighbors for the Vichy government because his son was killed at Avignon.
Right.
Right?
You could imagine.
That's the implication. So to underline the point that the story was just making about Philippe, Millie reflects on the fact that it was next to impossible to tell which side of the fence Maria was on. She could so easily be reporting things to both sides. One had to be careful. So very careful. This chap in the garden, for example. He must have escaped from somewhere. That would account for the absence of clothes. He was a refugee of some sort. And refugees of any sort were dangerous. It was best to stick to the beaten path and those who trod thereon. But he was so beautiful, like a stripling god. No more than 20, surely. It was delightful to see again someone as young as 20.
Hey, Millie, do you think maybe refugees who aren't pretty also deserve rights? And
She finishes her reflection by thinking that seeing someone as young as 20 was really rather like one of those little, long-ago pink cocktails. It did something for one.
Oh, God, it's so icky. This woman is gross.
She has her solitary dinner, reclines on her chaise.
How many courses?
Doesn't say. I'm assuming 3 at least.
Excellent.
Bare minimum.
Good stuff.
Reclines on the chaise, idly turns the pages of a book, and continues considering the refugee, even as she was giving the under part of her chin the regulation number of backhanded slaps, a ritual that, as a rule, occupied her entire attention.
Ow.
Are you not familiar with this?
No.
So this is a thing that women used to do because they thought that hitting that part of your neck would like make the skin tighten.
For the listeners, I just slapped myself in the neck for no reason.
Yeah, he made direct eye contact with me, leaned his head back, and then just slapped himself in his Adam's apple, basically.
All right, please continue with your explanation.
So she leans out a window. She quotes some poetry. She wonders if the refugee is also having a lonely rendezvous with the moon somewhere. And then her reverie is broken by Maria shouting and throwing another bucket of water into the garden because she thought she saw an animal or some kind of dog. Millie thinks it's him again in the garden, goes running downstairs. Maria assures her it was a dog, a huge dog, a very frightening dog. And Millie's like, it was probably the Trudeau's dog next door. And Maria is like, the Trudeau's dog is a Pomeranian.
Okay. Just baffling details.
She goes to bed. She wakes up the next morning. There's a whole little thing about how the bright sun in the room makes everything look old and dingy, including her face.
Amazing.
Until she had painted herself a new one with painstaking care and the touch of an inspired, if jaded, master.
Just to make this clear, does it matter that the dog is a Pomeranian in the previous scene? Like, did Maria say that she didn't see a Pomeranian?
Maria said she saw a huge dog, and Millie is just like, you don't know what you're talking about. It was probably just the Trudeau's dog. And Maria's like, the Trudeau's dog is a Pomeranian. It was not their dog.
I'm having a blonde moment. Are those small?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
They're teeny tiny little lap dogs. They're little puffballs.
Thank you.
They weigh like 10 pounds.
I'm big dummy.
So she storms downstairs to get her breakfast, and Maria is an absolute mess. Stuffy nose, red-eyed, a state that Millie found deplorable in servants. A series of sharp questions brought to light the fact that old Philippe was dead. Old Philippe, it seemed, was not only dead, but a bit mangled. To make a long story short, old Philippe had been discovered in a condition that bordered on the skeletal. Identification had been made through particles of clothing and a pair of broken spectacles. You mean to say he was eaten? Millie cried, which caused Maria to go off into a paroxysm of near hysterics, from which Millie gathered obscurely that Maria blamed herself for old Philippe's untimely demise.
Huh. Because she didn't stop the werewolf in the garden last night?
Maria is convinced that she threw the water at what she is now convinced was a wolf, and because she threw water at it, it scarpered off into the night and ate old Philippe.
Yum. Those old dudes are stringy, though. I mean, I have a hard time believing that any self-respecting wolf, were or otherwise, would go after the geriatrics.
It's funny you should say that. That's going to come up again later.
I swear to God, I had nothing to do with this story. I did not know I was going to be recording today at all. I just, zero clue. I have never heard of the story. I've never read the story. I am firing from the hip, and somehow I have Buster Scruggsed myself into a couple okay guesses.
You're doing great, bud.
Thanks.
So Maria's very upset. She's convinced there's a wolf. Millie says that wolves do not hang out in Paris. And after all, Millie thought, old Philippe was better off.
Jesus Christ.
At least he had lived his life, while she, with so much life yet to be lived, was embalmed in a wretched sort of flypaper existence that adhered to every inch of her, no matter how hard she pulled. The visa. She would have to see about it again tomorrow. And the tea supply was disastrously low. And this horrible toast made of horrible bread that was crumbly and dry and tasted of sawdust. And her last bottle of eau de cologne practically gone. And she couldn't eat this mess in front of her.
Somebody shoot this woman.
You are not vibing with Millie.
I don't like Millie, man. She sucks.
I mean, you don't think her complaints are justified?
No. No, I don't.
So she rejects her breakfast, it sounds like, and steps out into the garden and thinks for a moment about all of the good garden parties that she was supposed to be having, like I was saying earlier. And there, curled up, naked as the day he was born, is the refugee.
Nothing but respect for my president.
What?
I don't know. He's my president. I love this guy. Just randomly showing up in some lady's garden naked. I love it.
And dead asleep.
And yeah, dude.
She doesn't make a sound. She goes back into the house and she sends Maria off to the countryside.
Go to your parents' place. I'm done with you.
She's like, I got to get Maria out of here. It says, Her heels made hard staccato sounds on the flooring, as they always did when Millie had reached a decision. And she sends Maria off. She goes into the scullery closet and takes down from the nail a pair of grass-stained pants that had belonged to a gardener who had been liquidated before he had a chance to return for his garment. I'm assuming that they mean liquidated as in fired, but I do have that circled in the manuscript because every time I got to it, I was just like, liquidated?
Circle, question mark. Man got gooped.
Is he okay?
He got turned into soup.
This is a wartime story. It could be literal. I hope not. I hope the gardener's okay.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't be laughing at that. That's horrible.
It's such a, again, Jane Rice's word choice. Impeccable. I will never stop thinking about the liquidated gardener. But she takes the trousers into the garden. The refugee wakes up. She tells him to put on the pants. He obliges. So she tosses him the pants, turns her back as he stands up because he is naked. And it says, "Tell me when you get them on," she ordered. She waited and waited and waited and, hearing not the faintest rustle, cautiously swiveled her head around. Once again she drew in her breath, and the wheeze was very nearly an eek, for, not 6 inches away, was her visitor. His lips pulled over his teeth in a rather disconcerting smile, his eyes like glittering nuggets of amber. Jesus Christ. This is an audio medium. No one knows that you just made a face at me.
What the f*** does lips pulled over your teeth mean? That's horrifying.
I think what we're getting at is kind of a wolfish smile.
I don't like it.
So he's put on the gardener's pants and he's looking her up and down, and she tries to look confident rather than intimidated.
Does she hide her double chin? It's very important.
She promptly elevated her chin.
Let's go. Good Millie, sticking to the classics.
And tried to keep her consternation from becoming obvious. The boy laughed softly, a laugh that, somehow, was like a musical sort of snarl. He stepped back. He bowed mockingly. She asks what he's doing in the garden, and he says he's sleeping. "Don't you have any place to sleep?" "Yes, many places, but I like this place." "What happened to your clothes?" The boy shrugged. He didn't answer. "Are you a refugee?" "In a way, I suppose." "Yes. You're hiding, aren't you?" "Until you came out, I was simply sleeping. After I have eaten, I sleep until a short while before sundown."
That's how I want to live.
She asks if he's hungry, and he says he isn't now, but will be later. And she asks if he's cold, wandering around without any clothes. And then she says, "It's a wonder you didn't catch pneumonia." The boy grinned. He patted his flat stomach. "Not pneumonia," he said, "but it wasn't much better. Old and stringy and without flavor."
Okay. When was the story written?
It was published in 1943.
1943. And what's Jamie, pull up the history of werewolf stories, please. Jamie does not appear to be in the studio.
Jamie doesn't exist.
I guess this is my job.
Yeah. We can talk about werewolf stories, and we can talk a bit when we're done about werewolf stories specifically in World War II.
Let's go.
But for now, he makes the comment about old and stringy and without much flavor. Mm-hmm. And Millie frowns at him because she doesn't like being teased. And then she introduces herself and says she'd like him to stay until he's rested, but that he needs to come in the house because she doesn't want to get in trouble. And she finally asks him to introduce himself. And he says, "I have lots of names, even Latin ones." And she demands, she says, "Well, for heaven's sake, what is one? I can't just go about calling you, you know." "You might call me Lupus," the boy said. "It's one of the Latin ones. It means wolf." "Do they call you the wolf? How intriguing. But why?" The boy smiled at her. "I dare say you'll find out," he said. And then she says, and this is very important, "You mean you're one of the ones who, well, like the affair of that German officer last week? That is to say, in a manner of speaking, you're one of those who are still going at it hammer and tongs?" "Tooth and nail," the boy said.
"Hammer and sickle, baby, let's go."
"It seems so silly," Millie said. "What good does it do? It doesn't scare them. It just makes them angrier. And that makes it harder on us." "Oh, but it does scare them," the boy said, with an ironic lilt to his voice. "It scares them to death. Or at any rate, it helps."
Nothing but respect for my president. Love this guy. What a king.
He's a part of the French resistance is the implication here. But she convinces him to come inside. He won't sleep in Maria's bed. She tries to get him to sleep in Maria's bed. Not her bed, Maria's bed. But he won't do it.
He jumps up on the bed, does a couple circles, and then sniffs the pillow and says he doesn't like it, so he moves on.
Yeah, just about. He insists on sleeping on the parlor floor. And while he's sleeping, she starts to cook.
Let her cook. Sorry.
She says that nothing is too good for him. And so she pulls out all of her little hoarded bits and bobs and spends all evening preparing a meal. A very special. Yeah? What?
I'm just shocked she knows how to cook. That was Maria's job, right?
Yes. And it's also a thing that she doesn't seem to do often.
Oh, it's the rat in her head. Right. Yep. Okay.
The cool. Rat transferred from Maria to Millie.
Yep. The rat stays with the house. Yep, got it.
And she spends all day cooking. And then Lupus wakes up. It says, she scraped, peeled, measured, sifted, chopped, stirred, beat, and folded. Some fairly creditable muffins emerged from under her unaccustomed and amateurish fingers. A dessert that wasn't bad at all. And a salad that managed to give the impression of actually being a salad, which bordered on the miraculous. I will say, by the way, I have been glossing over them for time, but there are so many lingering descriptions of food in this story. Millie cannot stop thinking about food for good reason, right? Rationing. All the food has been, there's nothing good to eat. There hasn't been anything good to eat in quite a while. But there's a really long description of her father's butcher shop and all of the different meats and cuts, and Millie is hungry. You look like you have a thought.
I don't. Well, I have several, but none of them are worth listening to yet. But I'm excited to hear your thoughts when we conclude the story on Rice's usage of food as a literary device.
Yeah. So,
oh, buddy, strap in.
Lupus has woken up, and she tells him that dinner is ready. She says, "Are you hungry? I'm fixing some things I think will be rather good." "I'm ravening," Lupus said. "Let's go watch the sunset."
Romantic.
I'm just going to go ahead and read from here on because it's great.
Buckle up, baby. Let's go.
Millie put her hands up to her coiffure, coquettishly, allowing her sleeves to fall away from her round white arms. "Wait till I fix my hair. I must be a sight." "You are," Lupus agreed, his eyes glistening, "and I won't have to wait much longer." Effortlessly, he moved across and stood over Millie, devouring her with an all-encompassing gaze. "Won't you have one of these?" Millie asked hurriedly, hoping his impetuosity wouldn't brim over too abruptly. She shoved a box of liqueur-filled chocolates at him. "There's no such thing as a cocktail anymore. Come along. We'll eat them on the sofa. It's cozier." But Lupus wasn't interested in the chocolates. In the parlor, he stretched his long, supple length on the floor and contemplated the garden, ablaze in the last rays of a dying sun. Millie plopped down beside him and began to rub his back, gently, with long, smooth, even strokes. Lupus rolled his head over in lazy, indifferent pleasure and looked up at her with a hunger that would have been voluptuous if it hadn't been so stark. "Do you like that?" Millie whispered. For a reply, Lupus opened his mouth and yawned. And into it, Millie dropped a chocolate, while at the same instant she jabbed him savagely with a hairpin. The boy sucked in his breath with a pained howl, and a full 8 minutes before the sun went down, Lupus had neatly choked to death on a chocolate whose liqueur-filled insides contained a silver bullet from Millie Cushman's war bracelet. It had been, Millie told herself later, a near thing, and it would have been ghastly if it hadn't worked. But it had worked. Tra-la! Of course, it stood to reason that it would. After all, if at death a werewolf changed back into human form, why, logically, the human form would, if in close personal contact with a silver bullet before sundown, metamorphosis into a wolf. It was marvelous that she'd happened to pick up The Werewolf of Paris yesterday, had given her an insight, so to speak. And it was extremely handy that she'd had all that butcher shop background. Millie wiped her mouth daintily with a napkin. How divinely full she was. And with Maria gone, she could have Lupus all to herself, down to the last delicious morsel.
Man. You, Millie.
It's dark. Listeners won't know this because this is not a visual medium, but we just took a $5 and I got a little glass of wine from my favorite bartender, Brett, at Black Iris. Shout out, Brett.
I went through a 2-century-long wormhole where I lived 3 separate lives, so I don't really remember exactly what we were talking about, but I'm back, baby.
Well, we just finished the story. We weren't talking about anything. What do you think, buddy? Thoughts, questions, concerns?
Millie, all my homies hate Millie. But that is the most baseline takeaway from this story I can imagine.
Well, that doesn't seem to be popular opinion of Millie.
Huh?
So, and I will say there is very little scholarship around this story. And I was surprised how little scholarship there was around this story. But the few things I did see referred to it as things like the story of a spirited young woman in occupied France who outwits a werewolf by the skin of her teeth.
Was it written by like German sympathizer? I'm so confused.
Well,
who likes this woman?
I don't
name them. Put their names on the cast.
Well, no, I am beginning to think that people, even like scholars, even reasonably serious scholars, don't give women authors enough credit to think that they are capable of intentionally creating an unlikable narrator.
I mean, part of this is that I'm getting this all secondhand, right? I didn't actually read the story. Maybe the actual words are slightly more sympathetic to Millie.
I mean, I read you a substantial chunk of it verbatim.
Yeah.
That was part of why I really emphasized all of those characterizing details. The stuff about her calling her servant a bourgeois and like getting mad at her for crying after someone has been eaten, and all of the stuff about the Bastille Day bracelet, and all of these details are very particular.
She sucks.
And then she murders the French Resistance werewolf.
Just like baffling.
I just really feel like there are a lot of people out there that don't think women are capable of being funny.
Put some respect on my girl's name. The story whips.
It does. I think it's really good. I think it's shockingly good for something that hasn't gotten a ton of attention.
Yeah.
And so I was really surprised to find that Jane Rice's career never really took off. In part, it kind of seems like it might have been because it didn't really have to. She wrote a handful of short stories. She was published in some women's magazines. She was married. She had a kid. She was a stay-at-home mom. Maybe her career was as big as she wanted it to be. Maybe she wanted it to be bigger, but lacked the time to pursue it. It's hard to tell. But there's very little out there about her. I could only find 1 or 2 articles about her. And one of them was this tiny little profile from when she was in a woman's journal. And it's, hey, of all, here's a picture. This is our girl, Jane Rice.
Oh, nice do.
And it says, "My childhood was spent in a Kentucky river town, complete with paddle wheelers, tobacco wagons, and auctions in the courthouse square. I was educated in convents, and my business career, in a radio tube factory, was terminated by marriage. I have an 8-year-old child whose every activity is jet-propelled. I also have peepers on the front lawn, a vacuum cleaner that whistles when it's happy, and a dog whose father was apparently a raccoon. I like corn on the cob, men's pajamas, zoos, and ghost stories, and I dislike galoshes, mathematics, people who put burnt matches back into the box, surrealism, and stewed tomatoes."
Wow. Those are some opinions.
That's Jane Rice in her own words.
She would hate the children today, I tell you what.
It kind of seems like she might have, yeah.
If there's one thing I know about Gen Z, they fucking love stewed tomatoes.
Wait, what?
Don't worry about it.
Is this some kind of joke that I'm missing the context of? Or just a joke in context?
Yeah, we'll go with that. You're missing something.
What? I'm lost. Okay. The kids these days and their stewed tomato obsession.
You probably did know this, actually. Her editor bought her one novel and never gave her the rights back.
What? No, where'd you find that?
Wikipedia.
Oh, I missed that. I thought I did I missed that chunk.
Campbell purchased her first and only novel, Lucy, in 1943 and was holding it in inventory for a future release, for a future issue when Unknown suddenly ceased publication late in 1943.
Rude.
Street and Smith held the manuscript for several years, but after the war it vanished from their files and Rice had failed to preserve a carbon copy.
Oh no!
Despite efforts to trace it on the part of scholars and editors, it has not been located.
Oh, Jane!
So she wrote a novel called Lucy. Her editor bought it, and it appears it was lost to time.
Oh, Jane! Justice for Jane!
Justice for Jane.
That's a huge bummer. Especially because there's so much perspective in this story and so much depth of understanding in this story that I found really remarkable for an American woman writing science fiction during World War II. One of the things that's important to remember is this came out before the war was over.
So she would have been 27 when the war broke out. 26. Not kind of impressive. It's very impressive.
It is. What I find most impressive about it is its very casual, very deft indictment of white American women and their insatiable appetite that they will take out on anyone who stands in their way, right? And not a literal appetite, but just a broad hunger. It's that very American hunger, right? For anything she can have, anything she can get her hands on. Millie is utterly disinterested in the morality of anything that she does.
You know, I totally forgot Millie was American.
Yeah. She's a Pittsburgh butcher heiress.
That's right. That was some context that was lost on me.
Who, it is explicitly stated, stays in threatened Paris, because it's novel and it's fun and it's different, and she loves the novelty of everyone wanting her opinion because she's an American. And then just as quickly when the city is occupied, she figures out who the right people to know are, right? There are just so many stories I can think of contemporarily of Americans, especially American white women, inserting themselves into things that they don't belong in and making it about them and not caring who they hurt in the process.
It's a very American thing.
But from the perspective of 1943, that shocked me because Millie's characterization is spot on.
It's an early look at what is to come in terms of American culture. I do have a fun fact. Did you know that the word lycanthropy and its derivatives come from, obviously they come from the Greek word for wolf, but lycaon was an Arcadian king who chopped up and fed his sons to Zeus. To like test if he was really all knowing and could tell human flesh apart from other things. And as a punishment, Zeus turned him into a wolf and then brought his sons back to life.
Huh. His own sons? Or Zeus's sons?
His own sons.
Oh, that's bad.
Lycaon killed and fed his own sons to Zeus. And Zeus was like, dude, what the f***? And turned him into a wolf and then set the sons to hunt him.
This is why Greek mythology is like, I love a religion that's just full of people going entirely off the wall and just like, I'm going to feed my kids to Zeus as a test.
Just like, oh, you're really God? How about I kill my son in front of you and alter the course? It's just like, but it's the same with like Abraham, right? I mean, sacrifice your kid in front of me, but like, hold on, don't really do it. I was about to say,
he doesn't though. The problem with the Lycanth story is he's doing that under his own recognizance. Like, nobody asked this of him.
Nobody asked this of him. Just like as a test of your God. You're like hosting a being who's supposedly all powerful, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna feed him my kid and see what he says to that. That's cool.
It's just imagining like Zeus though being like, I didn't ask that of you. Why would you think I would like that?
My guy. I just wanted to come to dinner and f*** your wife, but like, buddy. Damn. So that's one of the earliest tales that we have of people turning into wolves.
Yeah.
And it's just a curse. He's permanently a wolf.
Bummer, dude.
I don't know where the full moon comes from, but...
So werewolves are that's an old mythology, as you were just saying. And then, to my understanding, there's kind of a resurgence in the Victorian era around when people start getting really into other kinds of otherworldly horror. And, you know, we're all very concerned about the advances in science and technology. It's making us all very anxious about, you know, the beast that lies within.
The idea of lycanthropy as like a diagnosable disease.
Yeah, that was a big one.
We're just going to have Robert Evans sponsor us at this point, but there was also a Behind the Bastards episode on Vlad the Impaler and how it evolved into the legend of Dracula, and kind of vampires and werewolves evolved from pretty much the same concept.
Yeah, they're very closely related. And one of the things I find so interesting about this story in particular, especially for when it came out, is, to my understanding, and granted, I am not a scholar of werewolf stories, and such a thing is real. There are werewolf scholars out there. But leading into World War II, so the 30s, a lot of the werewolf stories, you're dealing with a lot of exoticization and werewolves as sort of metaphors for both sexuality and hard to control male sexuality, and also very much werewolves are being used as a stand-in for the exoticized other. Lots of Orientalism and racism and things being looped into a lot of these narratives.
Gross.
Yes. And then after World War II, there's really strong and enduring association between Nazis and werewolves.
Never knew.
There is a lot of pulp narratives out there about like Nazis as werewolves and werewolves as Nazis. And that was because the Nazis themselves very intentionally invoked werewolves and werewolf imagery. Towards the end of the war, as the tide turned and things got worse, the German propaganda arm was putting out calls on the radio and in other forms of advertisements for the German people to sort of organically rise up and resist the Allies, you know, that kind of thing, which didn't go very well because everybody was exhausted. But they called them the werewolves. And there were paramilitary units called the werewolves. They used werewolf and wolf imagery a lot in their propaganda. And so that association really stuck and endured. And what's really interesting is this story, right in the middle, is using the werewolf instead as a metaphor for the rawness, the need, and sometimes the less than flattering.
It's a compulsion.
Well, no, because I mean, it feels like the werewolf here is a metaphor for the things that happen during war.
I'm not following.
Well, so he's explicitly underlined as being a part of the French resistance. He does eat old Philippe. Now, is that because old Philippe is a collaborator, or is old Philippe just a casualty? We don't know, and we'll never know. We
specifically decided that Philippe is not a collaborator because Philippe's son died at Avignon.
That's what Maria says.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I see.
But that's also immediately followed by Millie's note about how you can't ever tell who is and isn't on whose side, right? And that's the problem with being in a place like occupied France, is you can't tell who is and isn't doing the right thing, fighting the good fight. Not that Millie cares.
So in response to some of your earlier comments, I love this as an answer to kind of the Nazi werewolf thing, which, holy shit, the 3%ers wish they were them so bad. I like, and this is no in-depth literary analysis, I'm a big fan of our refugee boy being fully cognizant and aware of his actions, both in and out of wolf form, it seems. Kind of lycanthropy or werewolf-ism, whatever, as a curse, whatever you want to call it. The trope of a naked man in tattered denim shorts wakes up the next morning and has no idea what he's done. Like sure, it's been done a million times, mostly since this story was written, actually, which makes it even more impressive. But just like the dude who's like, yeah, I did that.
Yep.
What's up? I love it.
The thing to me that makes it so good and so interesting is that he very specifically says it does scare them, or at any rate, it helps. He is explicitly positioning himself as there to frighten the occupation government and to undermine the like he's a metaphor for the French resistance, you know?
That's praxis, baby.
That is praxis. Eat a German.
Eat a German.
And sometimes eat old Philippe if you have to.
You know what? My headcanon, dude's a collaborator. I don't care if his son died in Avignon. I'm sorry, buddy. You're selling secrets to the Germans.
But also, one of the things that really jumped out at me about this story is that for the first half, if not the first 2/3, you think Millie is about to be eaten because she is horny. She is so turned on by the sight of this very beautiful young man. And it's conflating two kinds of hunger in a really interesting way that, again, I feel like I need to remind you, it is 1943. We're not doing a ton of writing about how horny women are.
That's like 75% true. Yeah.
I mean, she's ravenous for him in two very distinct ways, and we ultimately find out which wins.
She is soaked for this young man.
It's fascinating because he is
exoticized, he's othered, and he's very clearly marked out as something that she is exoticizing and othering sexually. And ultimately he pays the price for it, which gets into like a whole other layer of discourse about the appetites of white women as pertains to men of color. And there's a lot happening here.
It is a rich text.
All of those things, the racial othering, the sort of sexual exoticizing, those are all ways that werewolves are set up in very classic iterations of the story, where those are supposed to be the reasons that you fear and despise them. But you don't here, right? You don't.
The werewolf story and our little tale of the hot exotic man are just a vehicle under which the appetites of this white woman are crushed.
She eats him.
I think I got that sentence backwards, but you know what I'm trying to say.
It's okay. I don't know. From every little characterization of Millie, she is not
a sympathetic character.
While I frequently kind of harp on the current cultural moment for being particularly bad for people struggling to understand that the protagonist is not automatically a good person. Like people have, I think right now, a particularly hard time with unlikable narrators. I feel like this is also good proof that maybe it's been a problem for a while, depending especially on the narrator's demographic characteristics.
Yeah. I just watched Dune and good lord, it's the exact same. It's like and casting Paul Atreides as Timothée Chalamet is like such a beautiful choice in that vein.
Sorry, how did you just say his name?
Timothée Chalamet.
Okay.
He's a very cute boy, but it's a very cute boy. We're the same age. But
oh wow.
Yeah, right. But just completely whiffing on who the good people are in the story. Really
yeah.
Wild.
One last note I want to make is I want to give this story some props for how literary it is. Like, I know I was kind of pinpointing her word choice earlier, but there's another thing that I had to look up because I'm uneducated American swine. Right toward the beginning, when she is talking about her father, it says, Millie's recollection of her father was but a dim blur of red face and handlebar mustaches and a deep booming voice that Millie had associated with the line, "The curfew tolls the knell of parting day," which she had been forced to learn and recite at Public School 46. And I had to look that up because I didn't know what it was from. And it is from Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard by an 18th century English poet named Thomas Gray. And I found this line from the Poetry Foundation about that poem that I found so interesting considering the context of the story. It says, "It reflects a melancholic evening mood that has probably never found better expression. As the legacy of day is the night, the legacy of the past is death, an inheritance of mortality, bequeathed equally by the rich and by the poor. Everyone awaits the inevitable hour." And I just think that's a really interesting poem to evoke in this story about wartime and the things that people are driven to in war and the expressions of human instinct and human desire and human appetite that become permissible or necessary or unavoidable in times of war.
Yeah, what a deep cut.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
That's really neat.
yeah. And like, on the one hand, this is kind of a silly werewolf story, you know? And on the other hand, I think it's saying a lot of surprisingly big and important things about f***ing Americans and their inability to keep their goddamn noses out of stuff.
Yeah.
But also, in this very present moment, I think it says a lot about people's ability to refuse to see the suffering that is very much in front of them because they are blinded by their own appetites and their own self-interest.
God, yeah. I have such a hard time looking at especially literary works of art as kind of more than what they were written to be. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So like reading this story in the year of our Lord 2023, there's like so much more meaning you can take from it. And I love that. That's cool.
Yeah.
It's very cool. We love words.
We do love words. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to hash out with? It's a short little story. If anyone out there would really like to check it out, it's not terribly long. You can read it in about half an hour to an hour, I would say. And right now, at least, you can read it on the Library of America website, and we will post the link in the show notes.
I'm going to read more Jane
Rice.
Good
old Jane Rice, who hates stewed tomatoes.
I don't know if I agree with that.
I mean, I like a good stewed tomato, but also I respect her preferences.
Yeah, kids, you go, Jane.
And you know what? It is weird to strike a match and then put the used match back in the box. What are you doing?
That is super weird.
Why would you do that? Also, who knew that this was a thing? It's apparently enough of a thing for it to be a pet peeve of Jane's.
Godspeed, Jane. Thank you so much for your service.
William.
Grace.
Any works of fiction you're particularly enjoying right now?
Let's see. Just watched the Dune movie, as I mentioned earlier. It was great. Please read the books and think about the people who you see as protagonists.
Read the books and ignore the mild Orientalism.
Yeah.
Just kidding. I have been reading a novel called The Survivalists by Kashana Cauley, which is very, very good. Not quite a one-to-one comparison with the story by any means, but also preoccupied with questions of comfort, distress, othering, the things that we do when we feel we are under attack constantly. It features a Black lawyer who gets swept up in a house full of preppers.
Oh, boy. Good Lord. I want to read that.
I am about halfway through. I'm on the edge of my seat. Cannot wait to see what happens. Also, I found out that Kashana Cauley was a writer on the show The Great North, which I enjoy very much. So if you are interested in all of these themes, I would say go read The Refugee for free, and then maybe consider buying Kashana Cauley's book. Well, yeah. William.
Grace.
Thank you so much for being here with me today.
It has been my greatest pleasure.
Is there anywhere you would like people to find you? Anything along those lines?
Please do not find me.
All right. Do not find him. But you can find me on the internet in all of the usual places, and you can find the show in all of the places that I am going to mechanically read to you in the credits in just a minute. And as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author, because they could sure use the love. Bye.
Bye.
Didn't Read It was created, written, and edited by me, Grace Todd. Kaylee Hughes is our publicist and producer. You can follow the podcast on Twitter or Instagram at didn'treaditpod, or reach us via email at didn'treaditpod@gmail.com. For source notes and further reading, as well as a list of all existing episodes, please visit our website at didn'treaditpod.com. We are recorded in Richmond, Virginia, with special thanks to Black Iris Social Club and Pesca Trio Publishing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review or rating on your preferred podcasting platform, or just tell a friend. If you did not enjoy today's episode, we are currently accepting applications for a full-time nemesis. Our intro music is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.